Hello, everyone. Welcome to eShe's third book club discussion. I'm Ekta Kapoor, and I'm the founder and editor of eShe, and I'm so happy to see you all here. Our book of the month is Christina Dhanuja's debut book, Dalit Women and the Fullness of Life. Christina is a writer, researcher, and strategist. She has held multiple roles in India, China, Singapore, and the Netherlands across government, business, and development sectors. Christina is the convener and founder member of the Global Campaign for Dalit Women, which works with survivors of sexual violence, climate change, caste atrocities, and economic oppression. She's also the co founder of Dalit History Month Project and has been published on several international platforms. She's joining us from New York. So, thank you, Christina, for being here. Your book took my breath away. It opened my eyes and it left me extremely uncomfortable, which I think is the point. I learned how caste and gender are intertwined. I learned how Brahmanical patriarchy and capitalist systems work together to keep the oppressed and concentrate power in the hands of a few. I learned that the only way to undo such horrendous historical injustice is not just affirmative action, but also proactive resource sharing. And I learned that the empowerment of Dalit women is everyone's responsibility, since everyone else has historically benefited from the undervalued labor of Dalit women and turned their eyes away from the violence, indignity, and exploitation Dalit women have faced for thousands of years. I want to quote this small passage from the book. Christina writes, "A simple, obvious way forward is to recognize that all Dalit women are human, not subjects of suffering or symbols of superhuman resilience. And just like everyone else, they are entitled to more than basic rights. They deserve access to all kinds of resources, knowledge, tools, capital, and power. They have rights to a full life in the way they define and desire it, experiencing the entire spectrum of possibilities." So, thank you, Christina, for writing this fierce and very important book and for shaking things up. I'd also like to introduce Kamna Singh, who will be in conversation with Christina today. A PhD scholar at the University of Delhi, Kamna's research focuses on the aesthetics of Dalit women's life writings, with particular attention to the body and the visual and literary languages through which caste is experienced, remembered, and narrated. She has worked as a sensitivity reader with media organizations and was part of a University of Chicago cohort for emerging South Asian literary translators. Thank you, Kamna, for being here. Please take this discussion forward from here, and I'll be back later to moderate the Q&A session.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm overwhelmed. It's a great opportunity for me to be doing this for Christina. Christina is one of the people that I have sort of looked up to ever since. I've been like a young person trying to navigate academia, navigate education, and like one of the few people who have like from a distance have just been there and like people that I could look up to in the absence of any role models and in the absence of any women like who led a similar life in some ways or the other. So it's been an incredible, like I'm truly deeply honored to be doing this for Christina's book. And I would like to start by showing this beautiful book, and which is again Dalit Women and the Fullness of Life. The cover by Shrujana Sridhar, who is again an artist from the community, and like really gorgeous cover, but like wherein you see women across different stages of life and just doing things, and the colors, the vibrant colors that are just there. And this reading this book has been difficult, has been affirming in a lot of moments, and it's been like a mixed journey, and a lot of times it just made me feel incredibly seen, and I just wanted to run away from it because of how seen I felt. Anyhow, wrapping this up from here, I would want to start by talking about like something that I kept returning to while reading this book. It was how deeply it honors Dalit women's emotional and inner worlds, and not just our struggles, but also our desires, our fears, humor, tenderness, and contradictions. Essentially, grants us much delayed humanity. What did it mean for you to write Dalit Women beyond the expected frames of constant survival, post victimhood, negative sociocultural connotations, and resilience?
Thanks so much, Kamna, for that question. And thank you, Ekta, for that lovely, lovely introduction, and so many kind words that I've heard in the last 5 minutes about the book as well as about myself. I consider it an honor to be having this conversation with Kamna, and I'm really happy we finally reached a point in time and space where we are able to discuss a book like this, where we are able to have a discussion that is dedicated to Dalit women, and it is about Dalit women, and it is a conversation between Dalit women. I love that. I love that for us, and I'm really proud of the work that uh, our community and our communities, women and men, have done, uh, big and small, for us to have reached this moment in time. So thank you for this platform, and thank you for initiating this conversation, and thank you for the questions, Kamna, um, that you've so carefully prepared. To answer your question, let me go back a little bit in time. About 6 years ago, 6 or maybe even 7 years ago, if my memory serves right, I presented a paper of the same title to in a conference that was very specifically anti-caste. It was a conference that was hosted by multiple organizations, but it took place at the New School in New York. At that time, I was living in the Netherlands, and I remember submitting this proposal and sending a video out for to be selected, and I was really happy that I did. And I presented this to an audience who were very distracted with many things, and that was the first time I sort of put this out into the world. To be honest, the response was very lukewarm. Uh, and then I remember talking about the same paper to a fellow Dalit woman activist who was much older than me, of course, and they didn't take it seriously. They responded pretty nonchalantly, very, yeah, I can see that you're talking about, everything about Dalit women, which is good and all of it, but there was no actual engagement with the question. Of course, I felt very discouraged by both of these experiences, more so by that personal sharing with a Dalit woman activist. And while I sat through it, and I was just thinking, why is this happening in the way it is? I realized that perhaps it is our hyper focus on violence, and survival, and trying to make the best out of what's given to us, and being just about glad that we have managed to cross another day, that we've managed to beat another illness, just being able to get there, to live another day, to have just about another meal. Perhaps it is that hyper focus, and for all the right reasons, because the reality is so for a number of us. But perhaps it is that hyper focus that is not allowing us to imagine brighter, better futures for ourselves, imagine what fullness would really look like. What would it mean for us to live the entire spectrum of what life has to offer, the good, the bad, and the ugly? Just go through experiences and be able to discuss and talk about and think about multiple subjects and have multiple interests. What does that life look like? Um, and perhaps and if you think about it, this hyper focus really does more than just misrepresent us, right? It's not just about representing us as subjects, or as symbols of violence or superhuman resilience, as Ekta read it out from the book, but it also works to curb our imagination. It curbs our ability to think of many possibilities, like what would it mean to be, to have the context that we have, to politically identify as Dalit, and still be an astronaut, for example, or still be a botanist, for example. Just multiple possibilities and expressions and imaginations that are out there are all, I feel, difficult for us to access, not closed, surely, but difficult for us to access mentally, cerebrally, and even physically and practically because of this hyper focus that we have on survival. So, really, I think that was my starting point for writing this book, and here we are. Does that answer? Did you want to expand on that question, or does that at least touch upon what you were seeking to hear,
It
Kamna?
definitely does. And in fact, like this hits like me quite well because since last 2 years, I've been sitting with this question myself that, who am I beyond my caste identity and everything? Where is my personhood? Who am I as a person?
Mm,
And for example, you also mentioned that, we survive on like we don't expect a lot from the world. And I think we feel that the world, I mean, at least I grew up with those ideas that the world owes me nothing, whatever it's there, I have to just accept it and just accept it the way it is. And I think it's like the identity is so heavy, it's so big that it cancels out everything. It cancels out all your desires, ambitions, who you can possibly be. That, for example, I've been a model and it also like brings in ideas of beauty and like how can I be a Dalit and I can imagine myself to be a beautiful person or like aesthetically, whatever. These things sort of I've been sitting with it for a very long time. I'm doing my PhD. The connotations of merit sort of comes in. Who am I to question the systems? Who am I to like epistemically challenge the established notions of what, like how I understand caste? Why, like what weight does my word even have? That who am I to even say anything? So I think when we talk about caste and how like in very heavy ways, like it becomes like really as a Sisyphus stone, like you just keep carrying it and it becomes like the biggest stone and everything else gets cancelled out. So I'm really, really glad that you brought up this idea of fullness, this idea of complete personhood, because this is something that I am. I'm like, I want to also be an individual. Like the structure tells me that, I'm a Dalit person. Nobody needs to remind me of that. I already know it. Let's just try to figure out our personhood beyond it. So thank you so much for that answer. And I think with that, I would want to move to the next question, which is again, one thing the book does powerfully is to show how caste is experienced not only socially or materially, but also emotionally and psychologically. There are moments of exhaustion, fear, loneliness, hypervigilance, and the pressure to constantly endure. Dalit women are so often disbelieved, constantly made to remain alert, and reduced to deeply violent casteist stereotypes, whether as undesirable, hypersexualized, excessive, and or morally suspect. In this context, I want to ask you how you were thinking about trauma and mental health while writing this book, especially in relation to the emotional costs of surviving caste on an everyday basis.
yeah, no, thank you for that question. I think the chapter on trauma is one of my most something that I really enjoyed and something that I really uh, was very happy with the way it turned out. Enjoyed writing, and very happy with the way it turned out. Um, and I think if when you go through that chapter, and I tried hard to sort of strike this balance. I'm not sure if it had come out the way I intended it to, but it's less about what we are going through internally, and it's more about how the system and the external world is reacting to it or does not have the ability to react to it or respond to it, because the kind of trauma, I feel like the type of trauma that we carry is very overwhelming, and understandably so. And it is also not just individual trauma, it's also collective trauma, right? It's cumulative, collective, intergenerational trauma, also trauma that we have generated between each other, amongst each other, in the way we have responded to each other or have not. And there's this world that you can speak of. Like, I remember as part of one of the projects that I work on, I remember one of the first sessions that I had to facilitate to a group of, Dalit and caste marginalized women. The first session was about, let's go on this journey of where we started and where we are and where we want to go to. You know, it was a very simple question, like, you know, describe your life journey and understand where you're going to go to. And, you know, and it's very hard to describe what happened in that session. It's like all that each of them wanted was a question to be able to, you know, literally just not literally is a bad word, but, you know, essentially talk about their trauma um, in all its glory. To a point, it just became such an overwhelming session because we were sitting with, you know, suicidal ideations, we were sitting with repetitive sexual assaults, and like just the breadth of trauma that the women have undergone, and to sit with it collectively was very, very overwhelming to all of us. And we were all triggered at it, you know, in different ways. Of course, if this were an upper caste led session, of this were, you know, a session that was not necessarily Dalit led, there would have been conversations around trigger warnings and, you know, all kinds of other embellishments that sometimes when Dalit women get to talk to each other, we don't necessarily focus on, because we know that there is just so much, and there's so much to be unpacked and so much to handle. But I've tried the chapter to not only focus on some of these things, but also to really push that onto the system and the way we have tried to understand trauma and the way we must understand trauma. And what does that look like within a therapy room, within a mental health setting, within an anti-caste mental health setting? I'll perhaps just read a passage that follows from a passage where I introduce the concept of caste minds, thanks to some of the scholarship that has already been put out. But you have to read the book to understand that. But for now, I just read a passage which perhaps is pertinent to the question. This is on page 167. It's part of the trauma chapter, as I said. Towards the end of my master's degree at Anna University, a pharmaceutical company began conducting campus placements. Since I was specializing in applied chemistry, landing a job as a fresh graduate with a drug manufacturer meant a great deal to me and my peers. I was confident I'd make it. How hard can it be, I thought. But some of my classmates and a couple of my professors, all Brahmins, believed that I didn't have it in me. She's just good at English, no actual talent. The campus placements will prove it. The company had a rigorous selection process, a written exam, a technical interview, and an HR round. And out of more than 70 applicants, only 5 of us made it past the written exam. None of my Brahmin classmates did. I was elated. Did I just beat 65 chemistry nerds? I couldn't stop smiling. But one of my Brahmin classmates, who had not made it, broke down, smudged kajal and all. Naively, I went over to console her. Don't worry, Lalita, I said. Other companies will come. You will get selected in no time. You don't understand, she snapped. I'm not sad. I'm angry. This was all fixed. They purposely didn't select us. She then walked away as I stood there with my mouth hanging. The caste mind not only fabricates merit, it also decides who can stake a claim on it. But my performance in class could only be because of English. My selection for a job could only be because of malpractice. But back then, I had no access to this counter dialogue. I knew I had to prove them wrong, but my mind was not actively discrediting their judgments. Neither was it indifferent. Instead, it made me stick post-its on the mirror. You're worthy. You've got this. Print inspirational quotes, seek reassurances from friends, and repeat Bible verses as mantras. So much labor. All because Lalita was a casteist piece of shit. There were other Lalitas and Rahuls and Keshavs, Sharmas, Shuklas, Ayers and Iyengars, Mukherjees and Banerjees and Bhattacharyas, Nayars and Menons and Chakos and Cherians, all saying bigoted things, all harboring caste minds that were too chicken to be human. The co-worker who smirked when every time I spoke shop, a friend's mother who jolted when mine went to shake her hand, the neighbor who poured water into my cupped hands even as I drank from it, the teacher who said I won't get far, the pastor who said our family was cursed. Though even as I write this, I remind myself that what I've gone through is nothing. too micro when compared to what my ancestors have, too little compared to what my sisters and siblings have, too light compared to the rape, murder, and institutionalization of Dalit women. But isn't this exactly what the caste mind wants us to do? Overwhelm us with trauma and have us compete with each other on who's suffering the most while the instigators roam freely? Worse yet, make an industry out of it. I'll perhaps stop here and then have Kamna ask the next question.
Thank you so much for reading that. I think we'll move on to the third question, which is I was struck by how carefully and gently the book holds Dalit women's vulnerability without reducing us to brokenness. There is grief, there is anger in the book, and your language has razor like precision. But that sharpness comes from unsettling the mold itself. It doesn't come from the language itself. It comes from the fact that it questions, it shakes the ground on which we understand the foundation of knowledge till now about us. Like it inverts the gaze. Essentially, like we know about caste from from the oppressor's perspective. So that sharpness, instead of I think here what I'm trying to bring up is the tone policing that often comes. So it's not tone policing, it's basically the content of what you're writing. It's not that. So to me, the book also felt deeply affirming. If I had encountered something like this as a young girl, I think I would have definitely saved me some confusion, a lot of grief, and some self-esteem building would have happened. So at the same time, the book also makes space for humor, care, beauty, and desire. How did you navigate writing about trauma in a way that resists both forced silence and spectacle?
Thank you. And I'm really happy to hear. I loved hearing you talk about the book. I wish I was able to read it when I was a little girl. I think that is the best compliment that I could ever receive, and I'll take it. I wish I'd read this book when I was a little girl, to be very honest. And as I've said in my author's note, I wrote this book for myself as much as I did it for others. And writing in the way I've written in this book can be extremely liberating because it feels like it took so much out of me to write this book, but it also took it away, took it all away from me. And it's a very mentally healthy thing to do, I think. And I'm really glad I had the opportunity to be able to do it. Of course, one can always journal, but it's also really amazing to have someone read your journal and be like, wow, that's, as Sarita says, it gives me goosebumps. It's extremely healing to even go through this process of writing. So I think in that itself, I think this book was helping me process my own trauma. What I also wanted to mention, since you spoke about how did I navigate writing about this trauma, is I feel like a lot of my writing process itself, the way I approach it is I have some form of structure, I have some form of thinking. Of course, the proposal itself that I submitted was 57 pages long, so I knew what should be part of that chapter. I already had an idea, and I also had a flow built, but the way it really turns out finally is very different, usually very different from what I have I've sort of had an idea of. I'm going to close the chat because I'm like really getting distracted. Yeah. So with this book, what I did was I just started writing. I just however unfinished and incomplete and however very shoddy it seemed, I just started writing. And the type of navigation I did, it's still a very mysterious process for me because I'm often reminded of this sort of anecdote, and I truly believe in this. Elizabeth Gilbert speaks of this in one of her TED Talks about on creative genius, if I'm right. And she speaks of her friend Ruth Stone, who grew up in rural Virginia, who's a poet, if I'm right. And Ruth Stone knows when a poem is approaching her. It's almost like and like sort of the wind that just comes from the mountains, or sort of like a horse galloping towards you. And what she would do apparently is find a paper and a pen and sort of just strap that energy onto that paper, like catch it and write it down, and then the writing just flows through you. um, I think I heard this when I was much younger, but I do believe that's what happens to me when I write, is that once you start writing, I can feel that the whole thing around navigation and the thing around how do you construct sentences, how do you go from here to there, to all of that is a process that happens after the energy sort of just dissipates. You just write and then you sort of go back to it and then you figure out how to sort of navigate the whole, or rather how to sort of position the whole passaging and the sentence framing and the idea flows. Um, but overall, I think with trauma especially, I just sort of put pen to paper and then it just sort of flowed through me, I think. But I'm really glad that it sort of came out the way it did, because the concept of caste mines, for example, was not part of my initial proposal. And when I encountered that scholarship, I was so thankful and I was so enamored by it, because this is precisely what we keep speaking of, wherein we start externalizing the trauma. We don't talk of it as something that we are lacking, but something that the system is unable to tackle, and this what the system has caused itself.
Thank you so much for sharing this in such detail. I think it sort of validates a lot of things about writing being a messy process, and especially when we are navigating really difficult experiences. I mean, I think, like, I will juxtapose this with about how, like, when you are like from like a Dalit community, you have to constantly in your mind also deal with merit. That you have to produce a draft or like writing up to a certain standard, and then like how it sort of I mean, before you even start, personally this is something that I've struggled with, although I think I've gotten better at it. I just don't start because I already have like a mental lalita in my mind trying to like already beat me up, so I'm like, I need to produce something that is better than lalita. So I think when you speak about it being like process and like difficulty and everything, it also affirms a lot of things for young students, young college going first generation learners. When they enter, we don't have any roadmaps. Nobody tells us how do you navigate this, and like how do you speak English, how do you write English, and like all these everything. English is just one part. Like how do you navigate that system as a whole? And then because you're already like having a burden of proving that you belong to this space, that you're not just a reservation or affirmative action beneficiary, you also need to justify your place. So we constantly try to like prove and disprove, and that in itself takes away so much mental energy that very little is left for the actual task. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. I just wanted to respond to one thing that you said. I wish everyone, all of us who aspire to write and who are writing must take a session or a writing class with Vijeta Kumar, who's an amazing writer, and it's truly a privilege to just sit through one of her classes. And I remember this line that she talks about, where you have to shoot the reader in your mind. Like you have to imagine shooting the reader, because when you're writing, your reader has no business in it. Like it's
yeah,
writing is your business. And she really shakes up this thought that we have to get the English right. Like she really shakes it up. And it's such a joy to sort of go through that process along with her, and sort of do the exercises that she asks us to do, and to really write in the language, in the medium that you are super comfortable with, and then sort of see what you can do with it. So I just wanted to respond to that quickly and say, like, we have yet another amazing Dalit example of Dalit excellence that really shakes up the foundation of what we know to be the standards of good writing and good language.
thank you so much for mentioning Vijeta. I mean, I'm working on my first book along with my PhD writing, different kinds of writing. I think I will definitely get in touch with Vijayta. Like, I really need some kind of help. So, moving on to the next question. Across the book, there's a recurring tension between wanting recognition and not wanting to be reduced to suffering or turn into an example. In today's moment, where grief of Dalits is often publicly consumed, what does ethical listening and solidarity look like to you, especially for Savarna readers engaging with the book? And what does meaningful allyship actually look like across institutions, friendships, academia, and everyday life? I also found myself thinking about how conversations around caste often bring visibility and legitimacy to people adjacent to the Dalit experience, which is to say, whenever like a caste privileged person, caste privileged academic works on caste, ignoring is probably the wrong word, but uh, decentering the material reality of what like a Dalit student or Dalit like an academic from the Dalit community or a writer from the community sort of navigates. How like while Dalit scholars and writers remain continuously like structurally unseen, how do we navigate that? How do we like imagine solidarities in such an unequal space?
Yeah, I think this is sort of course, there are no easy answers to this, but it's a very, very important and a pertinent question to be answered. And I think it falls, it does not necessarily fall within the gamut of allyship. I think it falls within the gamut of work practices and what are good work practices and what are what is um, it falls within the gamut of human rights. Essentially, that's what I'm trying to say. Like, every Dalit person and every caste marginalized person has a right to a good, safe, and a growth providing workplace. That is what it is, right? It's so if you happen to be a Dalit scholar, regardless of what you're working on, regardless of your personal positioning, your social location, you have the right to be mentored in just the right way. You have the right to be given the resources and the tools that any PhD scholar is. So it's not like allyship, it's not, charity, it's not something that people do out of the goodness and the transformation of their hearts. I discuss this within the work chapter, where it's not just about the changing of hearts and minds, which is where I put the conversation around allyship and solidarity into, because that definitely does need the changing of hearts and minds. But as far as workplaces are concerned, as far as, academic spaces are concerned, there has to be actual structural overhaul. There has to be actual policies in place. There has to be actual frameworks, grievance redressal mechanisms, a whole bunch of those that Dalit workers and Dalit scholars and Dalit academics can access if and when they are not being given, and if given the resources that they deserve to be and that they have a right to, or if they are facing any sort of discrimination within that space. So I think it's important to sort of split that conversation. But when it comes to specifically allyship and solidarity, I feel like we are definitely at this point in time where we have to make the distinction between spaces and opportunities that we need the allyship for and those that we already can take for ourselves. So I don't want to keep harping on solidarity and allyship, and I don't want to keep harping on, I need you to do this, I need you to allocate resources for me, I need you to give me more money, I need you to do this, and I need you to do that. Because it's not always the case all the time. Of course, from an institutional perspective, reparations are important, compensations are important, but from individuals, I think it's important to make that distinction depending upon the spaces that we're talking of. So if you're speaking of academic spaces, I think, like I said, it's about workplaces, and it's not so much about what these upper caste professors or upper caste allies are willing to do for me. I wanted to read Ekta's quote that she mentions from the book. Knowing when to partner with allies, why and what's in it for the anti-caste cause is key to forging allyships that are constructive and not exploitative. May I interview for my research that promises no structural change? No, you may not. Yeah, which is what I'm saying. I think there's so much of strategic intelligence that we all have already, and you know, as Dalits, as participants in this, you know, in this world and in this public world and in spaces, I think we've become equal, and if not, you know, yeah, if we've become equal stakeholders in this space, and I think we can definitely decide what types of allyships we want and who are the type of allies that we want and what's really in it for us and what are the terms and conditions of that partnership. I think we have enough and more amongst us and within us to determine that, rather than be in a space of constant asking and being patronized by allies, quote unquote. If that makes sense.
Thanks, Christina. I think that's a lot for me to think about, and for hopefully for other people too.
Yeah, we can have the audience questions. Thank you for the wonderful conversation so far. And we will open the floor now for audience interaction. And actually, I'm going to take the privilege of asking the first question because you know, there were so many instances where I was taking notes and I was writing down and I was, you know, learning actually how to unlearn, you know, the kind of social conditioning we are brought up with. You know, it made me wake up to, you know, the language that we use in our professions every day, even when we want to be an ally, even when we are trying to help the cause or to support the cause, we may be using terminology, or we may be, like you've written, I'm going to read out this quote that you've written. By emphasizing Dalit this and Dalit that, by overemphasizing Dalit this and Dalit that, we run the risk of reifying a system that made us Dalit in the first place. By exceptionalizing the Dalit identity, we end up essentializing caste. And later in the same page, you're saying the ultimate purpose of our Dalit assertion, expressed in the politics we practice and the perspectives we hold dear, is to annihilate caste. We must, at the core of it, disbelieve caste and our caste locations. It is in rejecting caste that we become Dalit, and in its eventual absence, we would cease to be Dalit. You know, I mean, I mean, so many instances I have noted down where it really makes me look at the language, you know, especially somebody who works with language, makes me look at the language that I'm using and the language that I've been used to, and why have I been used to that language, you know. I want to ask you, you know, you bring in this idea of institutionalizing the Dalit woman, and about the idea of NGOs, that how, you know, that is also a system that is perpetuating caste. It's a system that's perpetuating the oppression of Dalit women. You know, would you like to talk about this aspect?
Yeah, I think if you're helping an NGO, I think you should continue to do that. I'm not. Obviously, the objective or the purpose of, you know, making these points and you know, really putting down some of these perspectives on paper is not to stop someone from doing the help or providing help to people that so badly need it. But the objective is definitely to have a long-term vision around what it means to keep oppressed people within those structures of oppression, and who is, and at whose expense and at what cost is that continuing to happen, right? That is essentially the objective. In fact, you spoke about language, where you say, you know, overemphasizing Dalit this and Dalit that, and, you know, at the core of it, we must disbelieve caste, because we have to, when we talk of the, which is why I make the distinction between a caste identity and a political identity, or rather a caste location and a political identity. I very seriously see Dalit as a political identity and not as a caste location. It can be a caste-based identity, but it is not necessarily just a caste identity. I'm a parayar, right? That is my caste identity. And it is in rejecting that term of parayar that I am becoming Dalit. And I'm politically identifying as Dalit in the hope that it may not happen in my lifetime, but maybe 100 years from now, caste would have become so small and it would have shrunk so much that I no longer need to identify politically as a Dalit person. And I have to seriously believe in that project. I have to seriously believe in that. In that process of annihilating caste, right? The idea is not to be Dalit forever. That's what it is. That's what I'm trying to say. And the second thing about NGOs is, of course, it's an industrial complex. We are all part of that industrial complex, and we are all interacting with it, and we are all participating in it. Like I work with, I myself, I'm heading a nonprofit initiative back home in India that works with survivors of caste-based sexual violence, and of course, we are all participating in it. But the objective again is not to just drop all those responsibilities and be like NGOs are bad, and I won't work with survivors of who gets to work with them, like, because there's so much of a gap between what needs to happen, what the state has to do, and that gap is not being met. And currently, sadly speaking, that gap is being met by nonprofit initiatives. Again, the objective is to have a long-term vision, and the objective is to run movements, and is to transform movements with the idea that at some day nonprofit initiatives must become redundant, to the point that Dalit women and survivors of caste-based sexual violence, there should not be any sexual violence, and B, Dalit women themselves have the agency to make those decisions, whatever that is, and to really take away the role of the social worker who's in the middle. Yeah.
Yeah, essentially, like
That makes sense.
yeah, the way you've explained it in the book is, we kind of outsource also like our responsibility for the historical oppression to
Yeah.
the NGO, and then you think like your job is done, but it's not. It's in your everyday life. It's in the way you are helping or creating opportunities, or seeing people as humans, as you've written. And why the whole the concept of gender and caste being so interlinked. This is coming out so clearly through the book. So I'm going to read out this quote from Bharti Arya. She's put this in the chat. I can share one experience here. When I got into college, my friend commented that, Bharti, you are so intelligent. How come you are SC category? That's scheduled caste for those who are not from India. In a way, she accepted my intelligence, but can't accept me. And she then never talked with me. She was Brahmin, and that made me realize it is not that we lack intelligence, which I myself thought and tried to push myself way harder. It will always be hard to get validation just because of caste, and nothing can change it. Bharti, I hope something can change it. And also, Fauzia wants to make a comment. Fauzia is from Balochistan. She's now living in West Virginia. And she's just saying that she got to meet all of you amazing people today. She says, I'm dumbfounded listening to today's great discussion. Thank you, Fauzia. If anybody wants to ask any questions, please go ahead. And in the meantime, I'm also going to ask Christina about another thing that I found really interesting is how, Christina, you've talked about corporate casteism, and there is this, it's really eye-opening, like for a lot of people, I think, who would not have noticed this, or they would have noticed it, but they're perpetuating it. So that you have quoted Tina Vinod, who's a DEI expert, and she says, caste makes people very uncomfortable. Every time I bring it up with senior leaders, the room goes completely silent. There is deep discomfort around affirmative action, privilege talk, and religious roots. And it is so, it is very discomforting, to read the whole book. And that is why I appreciate it, because that's what you've said, that if it is not making you uncomfortable, you will not change. The people who are comfortable, why would they ever change? Why would anybody ever change if you're comfortable? If the change will only happen when there is discomfort. Any revolution in history has happened by creating a lot of discomfort. In some cases, there have been armed discomfort and violent discomfort being created. Here we are still, not reaching that point yet, but you never know. That is why I think it is important for people to read this book. It is important for all of us to feel uncomfortable. Like Kamna said, as a young student, she felt uncomfortable. Me, as an older mother with 2 children, who are adults and working, I'm feeling uncomfortable. And I think this is a really important part of this. Yes, thank you, Fauzia. Would you like to say something? I mean, you've always been a very active participant, so please do share your thoughts today as well.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here. Yeah, that thing that I wrote in the chat was just an introduction and hi to everybody. Thank you so much. Well, I was dumbfounded. As I told you, I could not actively participate because I was somewhere else. I don't know where I went. So thank you so much, you writers, you scholars. You impress me. You inspire me so much. I really cannot talk. But now that I woke myself up and I said, let me say something I want to say, and I really want to ask. This is out of curiosity only, because I have never been in that position, so I have no idea at all what somebody being a Dalit scholar or knowing all sorts of worlds can go through. You've seen that world. It's a totally different world, that much I know. It's not the world where other people think from. And who are these other people? I have no idea that too. I am somewhere everywhere, so I cannot relate to a lot of things. So let me admit in the beginning that I cannot relate. I cannot even imagine what anyone going through all that can feel. So I can just a little, want to imagine kind of thing. And that too, because of my experiences being from Balochistan, gives me a little hint of, what is it, a bit of how people look at you as different would feel. Because they used to do that with me in Pakistan. We Balochistanis are considered to be like those downtrodden, the underdeveloped, the these, the those, the that. And I kind of used to get a kick out of it. I don't know if you get it or not. I used to get a kick out of it because I used to go to Islamabad to different meetings and all, going as a Balochistan in my own attire, in my own way. That was not my way. Actually, that was the way they perceived to be. So I used to go with their perception, wear a whole big chadar, and the way they would expect a Balochistan to be. Then put on my light, the finger on the thing, and then just speak three sentences, and everybody's heads would turn. What? And then they would come to me. Are you from Balochistan? I used in my heart, somehow, let them see. Let them listen. I used to get a kick out of it. Just teasing them. Yeah, I'm from Balochistan, being quiet in the beginning, but then say things that would touch them, hurt them, make them feel gingered, like we said, gingered them and stir them, and then stay quiet again. Just like any common Balochistan would be. But then they would be like, who was this? Who was it? So I used to get a kick out of it. I wonder if, as a Dalit, do you get a kick out of smashing their minds up? That what do you think of us, kind of thing? Do you really feel? I used to actually not only feel a kick, but I used to be gratitude. That thank God that I'm not the Dalit or the Balochistan that they are expecting me to be. I'm out of those expectations and I'm out of that. And now I can see from the top of the wall what this side looks and what that side looks. So it gives me a privilege, a kind of a benefit. So am I glad I'm in this level that I can exactly know what Dalits are feeling, well as those who are not Dalits are feeling. So I can kind of relate to a lot of things. Do you ever feel privileged? Is my short question. Do you ever feel privileged as a Dalit? Just the way I used to feel privileged as a Balochistan. I don't know. I'm not relating the same thing. I'm not saying you and us have the same issue, but I'm still curious. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing your thoughts today and steering us up.
Thank you for those questions. I think you've raised multiple things. One, I'm sure people cope in different ways. People try to make others, particularly caste privileged folks, uncomfortable so that they can get a kick out of it. Multiple things. Of course, I can't speak to how people across the community cope with this sort of situation. And it can be deeply, deeply hostile. I mean, and different types of environments can become very quickly hostile once they get to know that you're Dalit, and there are ways in which you cope. Um, and one of the ways in which you do cope is by showing them that you are not the type of Dalit that they expect you to be, and you sort of show up some of the shinier sides of you, so that you are accepted, and you have sort of a shock value out of them, and that sort of gives you a kick and a thrill and all of that. But few things there. One is I try not to, at least in my position, because I have sort of traveled that distance and I've gotten to the point that I am. I try not to keep it upper caste centric. Like, I don't exist in this world, or I don't walk into rooms, and I don't present at conferences, and I'm not part of spaces so that upper caste there are shocked or uncomfortable because of my presence. They're not my they're not centric to my way of presenting myself. Like, I don't think of, when I'm dressing up, I don't think of a Savarna looking at me and thinking, wow, she's a very polished. I don't think of them. They're not part of my mind space. What I do think about are my fellow Dalit women. I do think of my community. I think of my community and I think, oh, how amazing it's going to be when I'm going to be with them. And what are they going to say about this particular top that I've thrifted, et cetera, et cetera, that kind of stuff. The second question that you asked, which I think is a very important question, is do I feel privileged as a Dalit? Yes and no. I think there are certain things that are definitely privileged about the position that I am in. I'm speaking to you from a very, very caste-free environment. I'm speaking to you while I'm sitting at my desk in a well-lit, beautiful room in New York City, where I thankfully do not face, at least within my circles, I don't face caste discrimination. So I am speaking to you in a caste-free environment. So that does make me privileged. I'm also speaking to you from the global north. So that itself is another privilege. So there are just multiple privileges. But there are also things that I know that are not privileged about me. And this is a distinction that I make in my book, in the movements chapter specifically, where this careless sort of brushing generic judgment that we just sort of put it on anyone who's English speaking, any Dalit who's English speaking, any Dalit who has taken the effort to put on some makeup, have a haircut, or have a master's degree, or is able to have 4 walls, just anything. You just say, oh, she must be privileged because she's just not like other Dalits. I think that's a very, very careless statement, because the core part of that careless statement is that people don't know the difference between privilege and right. There are certain things that we all have access to. There are certain things that we all have a right to, right? The fact that my parents were able to access education and that they were able to put me in a school that gave me a certain type of education that, sort of gave me access to a college education, and from there on, the other opportunities, does not mean I'm privileged. It just means that they were able to exercise their God-given human constitutional right. So I think it's a serious conversation, but it's a conversation that needs to be had, especially amongst marginalized communities and especially amongst Dalits, when we sort of look at each other and think, oh, she's really loaded, oh, she's really privileged, oh, he comes from a privilege. What's really that? Like, I think it's important to I think we've reached that moment where we can unpack this more carefully and more carefully and really with nuance, rather than make careless statements around each other's privilege and each other's positions. Yeah, so that's what I would say to your questions, but also really, really glad that you could join us, and
Sure.
and I'm happy to hear that this was a dumbfounding conversation in a good way, I guess.
Yeah, awakening. And you know what? By privilege, I also meant privilege of being a Dalit. Not only the privileges that you get out in other spheres, like good clothes and good this, and no, privilege of being a Dalit. Like, I sometimes think, if I were born again, would I ever be wanting to born as an American or as a Karachiite or as a Bombayite? No, I would really be wanting to be born as a Balochistan again, because this beings from that background is a privilege for me. I have more enriched experiences. I can see the down and the up and the this and the that, all of it. Being from Karachi, I could have never understood what a Dalit feels, or what a Balochi feels, or what those oppressed feel. I am the oppressed, so I am privileged. I know how oppression works, and I know how it feels when people oppress. And I have also worked with oppressors, so I know how the oppressors are working. Hey, which oppressor would know more than me? I'm the oppressed. So that's why I feel privileged as an oppressed. And I would want to be born again as an oppressed, as a woman, as a Muslim woman, and as an oppressed woman, because that's what made me more enriched than an oppressor male mustached guy, So that's the type
I'm
of
really glad.
privilege I meant. And aren't you
Okay.
glad you were
Okay.
Aren't you glad? Like that kind of thing.
No, I'm
Do
really
you?
glad that you're able to. I'm really glad that you're able to see it the way you are, and I'm really glad you've reached a point in life where you're able to look back and think those things. And I'm really glad that you feel safe enough right now to be able to have that thought. Right.
Safe enough.
Don't.
That's the point.
Yeah,
That is the
I
point.
don't
Yeah,
necessarily borrow all of that you've said, but I see where
mm,
you're coming from, and
I got it.
yeah,
That was the point. Yeah, you really answered my question now. It only happens when you get to the point where you're safe enough
yeah,
to think like that. What a
yeah,
wonderful way of
yeah.
saying. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so Christina, you have answered a lot of questions. There was one question left by Kamna. Would you like to take that up now? Kamna, would you like to repeat the question?
So the last question was was basically what it means to imagine healing, joy, and fuller futures for Dalit women beyond the language of mere survival.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. So I'll read a passage from the joy chapter, which I truly enjoyed writing. Um, but I also wanted to say that the way the joy chapter flows is perhaps pertinent to the question that you're asking. Is that what I do in this chapter is really a deconstruct how joy is typically understood within South Asian spaces, particularly within Indian spaces. And for that, I speak of Mahatma Gandhi's uh, um, quote unquote Mahatma Gandhi's concept of summum bonum, um, I sort of deconstruct that from a caste perspective, and then I also deconstruct some of the um, uh, popular uh, current age sort of phrases that we so commonly use, such as the one that Brené Brown has spoke of, where vulnerability is being touted as a magic potion for joy, and something that works against shame. So I try to deconstruct that, and from there on, I move into two things that can work as avenues for joy. One is writing, and how writing as a process, as a practice, and as a religion, really can be a road to joy, or can be an avenue to joy. And one other thing that I speak of in terms of avenue is the concept of glimmers. Right? We would have heard of glimmers, that it's part of the popular cultural lexicon, where we speak of resetting the nervous system, and how glimmers can be a way to do that. For example, taking the moment to smell candles and like have a sensory experience, and that in itself can sort of shift the way your nervous system is. And looking at a cloud passing, or just being in the moment. So I sort of construct those glimmers as a community-based practice for ourselves. And again, you would have to read the chapter as to how I sort of do that. And then sort of I end the book with, how joy can be a way we run movements and the way we run life. So that's the passage I'm going to read now. Um, yeah. This is on page 211, and it's part of the last chapter, Joy. So, where does this leave us? A multifaceted, multicultural, multi-generational population of Dalit women at various stages of economic and social progress, at once surrounded by so much and so little, existing within multiple intersecting worlds that haven't entirely revealed themselves to us. We are discovering them even as we seek to live another day. We look at those around us and each other with suspicion and love, with trust and anger, with folly and fizz. We see our gifts, we see our grit. We know these are the cards we've been dealt with, and we must somehow find a way through these mangroves. How? There are likely no silver bullets, but maybe there are pathways we can plot even as we navigate the unknown. And perhaps joy can be a companion on our journey instead of a destination. Not a nice to have, but an indispensable must have, without whom our lives lose meaning. Joy can be a choice that we make over and over again, just as we choose justice. Joy can be a value, a principle that we will not compromise on. Joy can be a non negotiable without which we will not run our movements. Joy can be the very foundation upon which we will build our humanness and our identity. We are Dalit because we choose joy. Joy can be the collective force that we intentionally generate amongst ourselves to keep our sisterhood intact and our communities healed. Joy can be our songs, our words, and our beats, a sanctuary for our bodies and minds. Joy can be the very thing we live for, an inevitable consequence of our love, desire, and faith. Joy can be our children, little beings who come from our bellies and our hearts, hoping to settle into our love, to whom we will tell stories of Baba Sahib and Ayankali, with whom we will go on long walks teaching them about wildflowers and native plants, who will learn of our people's intimacy with the earth and look at our pasts with wonder and their futures with hope, who will show us yet again a version of fullness that we can bask in and learn from. But most of all, joy can be our weapon against despair, something we simply cannot let our young sink into. Thank you.
Thank you so much for reading that out. That was beautiful. I will just now hand
Thank
it
you.
to Ekta now.
Yeah. Thank you to both of you. That was a very thought-provoking and a very necessary conversation. I'm honored that both of you agreed to be here today and to have this conversation here. Before we end, I would like to activate the community. Please join the eShe Book Club on Discord. It's been created to highlight the work of South Asian women writers, and it is open to everyone. You can share reviews, suggest books, and connect with other readers. And we also have a space where people who live in the same city can connect with one another. So now that we're coming to the end, Christina, I want you to have the last word. What do you hope readers take away from this book? And what question do you hope they will sit with after they close the book?
Yeah, I hope people understand that every one of them is a stakeholder in the system and practice of caste. Every one of them individually and collectively. And use this opportunity to see the reach and the breadth and the consequence of caste, and truly and honestly take a look into what they have done, both in their generation, through their ancestral history or whatever, as well as their current, have done to perpetuate it, to practice it, and to continue to propagate it. I think that in itself is a massive, massive change that one can do. And for Dalit women who are reading this, my sincere, sincere hope is that you will be affirmed, you will be rejoiced, and you will feel not only joyful, but also encouraged to write more and to write expansively and to write about everything, and know that you can be anything that you want to be, both individually and collectively. And that as a writer, as a sister, as a friend, as a mother, I truly believe in you.
Thank you so much, Christina, for those words and for inspiring all of us. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you to everybody who showed up tonight and in the morning for those who are in the US. Read more books, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.